The Dell Optiplex, a name famed for its affordable and usually small form factor PCs. These computers were, and continue to be, a staple of many schools and businesses. Dell still produce Optiplexes, but many of the older ones have since been cast away, either thrown away or pushed to the back of a cupboard that hasn't been looked in for the past decade. I'm here to discover what sort of gaming can be done on one of these now lower than low spec PCs, and whether you should pick one up, as these older models can usually be found for little to no cost at all. So sit back and relax while I show you what adventures await you on old hardware like this. The Optiplex line was originally released back in 1993 and is currently in its 6th generation. The one I have today is an Optiplex 745 from the 3rd generation and was manufactured in 2007. Inside, she's sporting a modest Intel Core 2 Duo E6300 paired with a reasonable 4GB of RAM and an upgraded GPU in the form of an ATI FirePro V3800. The FirePro line was AMD's equivalent of the Nvidia Quadro cards, designed for computer-aided design and modelling rather than gaming. I took the card out of another PC, as it's much more in line with this level of hardware than the i5 it was paired with before. The card has a DisplayPort out and a DVI out for that dual monitor goodness. And now, onto the benchmarks. Fallout 3 ran great at 720p on the high preset, and was pleasant to play on this computer. In outdoor areas, the frame rate usually sat in the mid-40s, whereas indoors it was more of a mixed result, where frame rates would go between 30 and 60 depending on what was going on. I could have easily played through the whole game like this. In the end, I installed a mod that allowed me to cap the FPS to 30, which made for a very enjoyable experience akin to what the Xbox 360 offers. Strafe is a fast-paced first-person shooter that came out in 2017, so at least 10 years after this PC did. With a resolution set to 720p and the low-spec mode switched on in the settings, I was getting an average of 41 FPS, hitting 20 FPS at the worst of it. The 2007 release of Grid proved to be another game that performed similarly to the console version. At 720p on the high preset, minus the 4x anti-aliasing that the game enabled, I was getting an average of 37 FPS, with the game peaking at 46 FPS and hitting a low of 23 FPS when there were a lot of smoke effects and collisions happening at the same time. I've never really played the game much, so there were a lot of crashes and pile-ups. I knew that going into the 2013 reboot of Tomb Raider, I was probably asking a bit much for this computer. This was one of my favourite games of the 2010s when I bought it for the Xbox 360. Here I had the resolution set to 720p at all the lowest settings, and despite everything turned down, the game still struggled under the aging hardware running it. At some points the game was surprisingly smooth, but I found that during scenes with a lot of lighting or effects, the frame rate tumbled. In the end I got an average of 34 FPS, but I don't think I'd be rushing to play through the whole game like this, as the frame rate went into the teens far more than I would have liked. If you had nothing else to play it on though, you could probably manage with a bit of patience. Unfortunately, Fraps didn't seem to want to benchmark Slime Rancher, but I wanted to include this game as it's quite cozy, and due to the casual nature of the game, you do not need a super high frame rate to endure it anyway. I had the game set to 720p on the lowest settings, and based on what I experienced during my time playing, I would say the game ran mostly around the 30 FPS mark. There were a few points where the FPS would drop a bit when there were lots of slimes in a pen, for example, but like I said earlier, the game is casual enough that some frame rate drops don't matter too much. I felt like this test wouldn't be complete without testing the OG Crysis, which actually performed a lot better than I was expecting, given the reputation Crysis had for pushing PCs to their absolute limit. At 720p on the lowest settings, I actually got a respectable 32 FPS average, only going as low as 21 FPS during heavy combat segments. During the initial landing sequence, I even went above 60 FPS, but I don't think this is a frame rate you should expect to see during the rest of the game. So there you have it. Even on a computer as old as this, there are still a lot of games you can easily play. If you have one of these lying around or get offered one, you can pick up a cheap, low-profile graphics card to pair with it for under £15. A PC like this is probably suited best for retro gaming, and it does make me wonder how performance would be on an older OS, like XP, which is what this would have originally shipped with. Perhaps that's a video for another time? If you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this look back at an old PC. If you'd like to see more videos exploring old computers, please consider subscribing or leaving a like on the video. Until next time, this has been Retro CPU.